1, 2, 3, 4. If you can do all your stuff, what can figure it out? That's how it chooses you.
Hello.
Hi. It's so nice to hear you again.
So nice to be here.
Be here? I just put agave sweetener in this tea and I regret it because I wanted honey and then I thought, no, I'll try a low glycemic index sugar. Bleh.
Ew. Welcome to Smidgen edition of It Chooses You.
Smidge-dish.
Smidge-dish. It's like our normal podcast, but bite size, fun size, snack size.
Tiny little bite-sized Halloween candy Snickers for you. So this week, you completely inspired me with your tale of the Abernathy Boys. those little bastards is pretty cute. Those guys, and with tales from your own free-range childhood, I think is what we'll call it. Free-range childhood.
Yeah, we'll call it that. Well, rather than woefully neglected, lack of adult supervision or model for any kind of respectful behavior. Yeah, sure.
Normal social behavior. Yeah. You know, we try and put a positive spin on things here at It Chooses You. Yeah. So I wanted to tell you about what I think is maybe the most indicative sign that I was a latchkey / abandoned child. So today I'm going to chat with you about one of the ways I almost died as a child. A couple of the ways I almost died that were both associated with the gift of a bicycle and the implementation of a limited range that I was allowed to ride in.
Oh.
So I think you mentioned last episode that you sort of had free range within like a half mile of your house or something. Like that was okay.
Mile and a half-ish. Yeah,
mile and a half. Sorry, yeah.
I don't think I was given any limits by my parents. That was just sort of the natural boundary I found.
So I guess the difference for me is that my parents being who they were, they gave us very specific limits that we were allowed to ride within. And the great thing about having very clear parameters is that you know very clearly how to break them. So thanks, Mom and Dad, for teaching me that at a very young age. Oh, I definitely understand this rule, and I know how to break it. Thank you.
That's right.
So, like I said, my sister and I were both lucky enough to have been given bikes for a birthday or Christmas at some point. When we were relatively young, we learned how to ride as 2, 3, 4-year-olds. And we were also lucky enough to live in a relatively suburban neighborhood that was in places verging on rural. So riding around was relatively safe. So those things were positives. My parents' house is on a street that was sort of clinging to being a residential area, but was facing a lot of pressure from businesses that were sort of 4 or 5 houses away on the next street over. It was at the intersection of a couple of busier streets, and we had a budding mega church right across the street from us. So my parents' house is on 31st Street, and there was a mega church right across 31st Street from us.
Okay.
The pastor of that church, his wife, was one of my elementary school teachers. And she used to dress up for class like she was dressing up for church. And she used to wear diamonds. Like who wears diamonds when teaching 5th graders?
Especially in West Virginia.
Yeah, right? So I think they were like old school prosperity gospel kind of assholes. They're like, look how, don't you want to be Christian too? Look how financially successful Christians are. It was kind of like that. It was the vibe.
Where'd you get those diamonds? Jesus gave them to me. That's
right. Yep. Jesus hands out diamonds if you believe in him enough. I mean, forget all about hanging out with thieves and prostitutes. That's all a modern, deliberate, liberal misunderstanding of the gospel.
Diamonds are a God's best friend.
Just coming out with the zingers this morning. That church eventually bought a one-man shop. Mr. Guskey's greenhouse was right behind the original building that church was in, which was like a normal-sized church. They bought his greenhouse, bought him out of business, tore down the greenhouse, and built an addition to their church. They bought 2 old Victorian houses that were directly across the street from my house, tore them down, and set up a playground and another building for the people who go to their church. And now it's a compound that is quite a bit bigger than the county library, which is right across the other street from it. So really, that's kind of all you need to know about West Virginia right there.
So either religious imperialism or just God's plan.
So we don't normally do an intro a little bit in Smidgen, but Murphy had surgery this week, and he's having a hard time. So if you would like to send Murphy some love, I would very much appreciate it. He's getting better. I won't know if it's officially cancer until they get tests back, but they kind of looked at it and they're like, oh yeah, that looks like cancer. So he's experiencing the cone of shame this week, and he's not thrilled. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, and just in case people don't know, Murphy is not Teresa's boyfriend, but her dog.
That's right. So really, the story of that church and its expansion is all you need to know about West Virginia, except for the mine wars, which I will cover in a later episode. My sister and I, at family gatherings in the country, when we were going to visit the cousins and the aunts and stuff, we were allowed to wander the woods as much as we wanted, as long as we stayed together. We were allowed to go as far as we wanted, do whatever we wanted. We were given watches and told what time we had to be back so that the family could pack up and go back to town. But basically, we were just allowed off.
Because the second young girl is really helpful should there be any kind of attack or attempted kidnapping.
Yeah, well, I think by that point, they had seen she and I fight each other, and were relatively convinced that if we teamed up, we could overtake and attack her.
Oh, okay.
We were not shy. We were closed fist, punching, hair pulling banshees when we fought.
All right.
So, yeah.
Oh, man, I really wish you had video of this stuff. I would kill to have been a fly on the wall.
Yeah, I mean, it was intense for sure. I'm not sorry it's over. I like her very much now. It was a challenging time. Let's just put it that way. But yeah, so they used to let us, as long as we stayed together, we were allowed to do whatever we wanted. So we'd go and visit my Aunt Evelyn, who was really my mom's Aunt Evelyn, one of my grandmother's 8 brothers and sisters. Kyle, Clayton, Norman, Mildred, Henry, Lila, Evelyn, Victor, Vernon. And we would just walk across fields of southeast Ohio for 5 hours while they visited and then come back. So in town, though, the rules are different. Just like for the Abernathy boys.
Yeah.
Heading east means more people and more likely to have things stolen from you. So my dad set us down with the bikes, and he's like, look, we're going to let you have some freedom. But you can only have freedom within this triangle of streets, right? So Emerson Avenue to the east of us, Murdoch Avenue to the west, but Murdoch curves around and meets Emerson. West Virginia cities are built around hills.
Okay.
And Lakeview Drive to the north. So within that triangle, we could do whatever we wanted on the bikes. But, weren't allowed to go outside those limits.
How old were you at this point?
9 or 10.
Okay.
And this is obviously a summertime thing. They were not encouraging us to come home from school and then go on bike rides. We were supposed to come home from school and watch television, like good American children.
Right.
The first afternoon that we were allowed to go around this area, we rode every street and alley and cul-de-sac within it, and then we were bored. It doesn't take that long to ride your bike around such a small area. And not coincidentally, not very many of our friends lived within that area. So, but like age 9 or 10, it was probably good parenting to tell us that we had to stay close. There was an effort made to acknowledge the wider world and its dangers and encourage us to stay close to home. That's great. That's great. But saying it was literally all the effort they made.
No attempt at enforcing.
No. My sister and I both in the summers used to come and go like we were at a boarding house. Like we would leave at 7:30 in the morning and come home by dark. Didn't tell them where we were going, what we were doing. Gone all day. And then at dinner, what'd you guys do today? Nothing. Also, don't notice the burned down house a few streets away. So I have the same curse now that I had then, which is that I wake up early, like the day begins and I begin. And those two things happen at roughly the same time. And not very many people, turns out, are like that, particularly in elementary school. So, I mean, they might wake up, but they're watching cartoons and eating sugary cereal for the first 2 hours of the day, So I was often awake and lonely early in the morning.
I'm just imagining you at 5 a.m. pouring a cup of coffee and getting the newspaper. And then by 5:30, you're like, what's everybody up to?
Is it too early to call Jessica? Yes. It's 5:30 in the morning, Teresa. You need to wait at least 4 hours to call Jessica. And on those adventures, as long as we were home before dark, or, my parents eat dinner early, so like dinner time, which to them is 4:30, which is lunch for people in other parts of the world, but dinner for my parents. Yeah, so as long as we were home by then, no problem. This is, as I was thinking about this, I realized that I forgot and then remembered that I grew up 3 houses from a sub shop that hickory smoked meat and cheeses on site.
Oh my God.
It maybe explains my obsession with snack plates because my backyard often smelled like smoked ham.
And if I lived there and I were a 9-year-old, I would have just been hanging out at the snack shack.
It was amazing. And they had like candy, like old-timey candy, like the buttons, candy buttons.
Oh,
and
yeah.
strings of licorice and things. They had a candy wall. So much fun.
Oh my God. It sounds like paradise. Let's move to West Virginia.
Or I think it was the same place, but maybe the sub shop moved and the candy shop came in. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense that a hickory smoked meat place would also sell strings of licorice. But so while I was riding my bike, I was hit by a car in that parking lot because I wasn't paying attention.
Oh, God.
I was riding around and it was my neighborhood and I was like, who are all these assholes in the parking lot that I ride my bike in, basically.
Who put that car there?
Yeah, exactly. So I scared the shit out of the people in the car. Like, they heard the thunk of their back bumper hitting my bike and then looked in their rear view just in time to see a little blonde girl fall out of frame. Right? Like, terrifying.
I'm assuming they weren't going too fast.
No, they were pulling out of a parking spot. And I was fine. Like, no harm. But I often scared the shit also out of passing motorists when I was on the street because bike lanes were 15 years and 1,000 miles away from where I grew up. And so I'm just riding on the road and people are driving by me honking and angry that I'm on the street. And fair enough, wobbly little 10-year-old on a pink Huffy bike. That's not, you don't want to have to pass her in a hurry on your way home from work, I get it. I'm not saying they were wrong, just that it impacted my experience is all. Having identified, after being hit by that car in that parking lot, that I can in fact be killed by cars on my bike, I was like, oh great. And having like shrapnel and scabs on my hip to prove it, I am very bored riding the same streets all day. And while there's a pack of kids in my neighborhood, like we found every construction site and pile of rubble, an alley with a cornfield in it, no joke, West Virginia, that was nearby. And then I was like, now what, Mom? I've seen all this. What's next? So in a moment of boredom-inspired bravery, I crossed a street I had been told not to.
Uh-oh.
And after that, it was over. After the first time, and I got a wonderful rush of adrenaline every time I did it. So after a while, it could have been that I was just addicted to breaking the law,
Was your sister with you at this time? Was it kind of a thing you guys did together, or was it your thing?
So it didn't start out as something we did together because we had different groups of friends by this point. For the betterment of all mankind. As I said, we used to fight like cats and dogs. We needed different groups. But in a moment of like slumber party, maybe we can actually be friends, sharing of secrets, I told her that I sometimes ride my bike outside our limits. And she was like, I do too. And then we used to do it together sometimes. Yeah. But of course the problem, like you have a buddy, which is nice, but then you also have someone who's going to rat on you, which is the next time she gets mad at you for something else. And so ultimately I decided it was a liability to take her on most of the adventures I had because the risk of exposure was too great. So some places I wanted to go were actually too dangerous to get to because in West Virginia, towns have parts of them that are the same town, but they're connected only by highways. And you can't ride a pink Huffy bike on the highway safely. Right. But just outside the area I was legally allowed to be in was one of my favorite places. And it was one of my favorite places because it was legitimately terrifying. And it's one of those things where it's like, I'm going to go scare myself and it's going to be fun. But of course I have the belief because I was raised by people who mostly cared about me and did a good job and introduced me to risk in a reasonable way for the most part, that anytime I felt scared, it was only temporary and was actually going to be okay. Like nothing bad happened to me, right? I was very, very lucky that way. But this place, which was a piece of woods in a valley between the neighborhood behind the high school and a riverside commercial area, okay? So, and I say valley, and it's not as big as that. It was sort of maybe 4 small city residential blocks big.
Okay.
But it was a very steep valley. We called it, or I learned from friends, that it was called Terraton which was enough like Tartarus for little nerd me to get a nice spooky vibe from it. And when a place has a name, you know some shit has gone down there, right? Like, that's what that means. Something happened there. That's why they named it.
You don't name places where events have not occurred.
That's right. That was one of my favorite places to go. But I learned later that Terraton was actually a bastardization of Terrapin, because Terrapin Park and Casino wasn't in that location. It was substantially outside of town, but it was a private park in the early days of Parkersburg, West Virginia, and the casino burned down in 1917. So next week in Parkersburg history, or whatever. Anyway, so this place, it was cool and scary because there was a ton of evidence strewn about that people were living there. Okay? There were shanties and like fire pits and a whole lot of empty beer cans. Right. And that's right. But it thrilled me. I was like, this is so exciting.
I know it turns out okay, but I'm still worried for little you.
Well, and rightly so, because there was no guarantee that it was going to turn out okay. Luckily, it did. So if you rode your bike along that path, eventually it would dead end at a place where, like, it just ended. You couldn't get out of it. It was very steep, and you would then have to walk your bike up a very steep hill to get out. You're basically, like, emerging from the underbrush at the edge of, you know, an office park's back lawn kind of thing. And it made me feel very much like a pioneer, and I fucking loved it. So I would take that as a, quote, shortcut, even though it took much longer to get anywhere going through it, just because it was so cool. As your noises indicate, and you are correct, it was incredibly dangerous. I mean, I was a 10-year-old girl alone, and people were living there. So I'm very lucky. The problem is, it's still a small town. And the problem with those is that someone your mom works with is always on the road to see you do shit she knows you aren't allowed to do.
Yeah.
So one day, I was crossing Emerson Avenue to Terraton to see my friend Becky, who lived up the hill from that dead end. And I was spotted by our former babysitter, who happened to drive by just as I was crossing.
Fucking narc.
Fucking narc. Although, from an adult perspective, very caring. To notice that a 10-year-old girl is going alone into the woods and care enough to tell someone about it. So, on the one hand, fucking narc. On the other, trying to do a good thing. By the time I got home, a full 8 hours later, by the way, because I still wasn't required to tell him where I was going. So I came home 8 hours later, and my mom was furious. And I was grounded from the bike.
And she had, like, hours to, like, fume over it, too.
So, you know, she had a significant marinating time with those feelings. Yeah. But here's my question. Here's my adult question for you, Cheryl. Why exactly were you so mad? Was it because I ignored the rules? Rules, by the way, that were handed down to me with no discussion or agreement on my part. I just had to do it, right? It must be that. Right? I mean, it can't be because she was worried about me, because she literally didn't know where I was all day, every day, all summer long, and it was fine.
Right.
And then I was like, but wait, maybe it's because another adult discovered that my parents had no idea where I was, and she was embarrassed.
Yeah. You're pointing out an inconsistency that I really relate to from my childhood, which is like, oh, I'm sorry, you don't get to not care 98% of the time and then care 2% of the time. Like, that's not our relationship, man.
That's it. Yep. Oh, now you care. Oh, this is a circumstance in which you care. Okay. So I guess Cheryl, write in. Let me know. She's never going to listen to a single episode of this. Just makes me laugh so hard to call her out.
Well, you know what? Maybe if she listened, we wouldn't talk so much shit.
That's right. Again, she's paying no attention to what I do all day. See? Proof.
You know what? When you're famous, she's gonna fucking care.
Yeah. You'll be sorry when I'm dead. That's the takeaway.
Oh my. Okay, so you're in trouble.
So I'm in trouble, but that's the end of the story, is I got in trouble. But that moment made me realize three things. The first is that rules mean nothing until the person who sets them sees you break them.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
2, my parents have a deep network of spies around town, and nothing I could do outside would ever remain secret. And 3, that I needed to learn to drive as soon as possible. And that's it.
I love it. Oh, that's so great.
Thank you so much for letting me tell you that tiny story.
Please do subscribe to our podcast. And if you have a moment, write us a review because that helps us find people who would also be interested in these types of stories.
Thanks, you guys. Have a great week.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Testing? Great. Thank you for listening to It Chooses You. Your hosts are Teresa Sparks and Claire Patton. Our theme song is by Bobby Dart. If you'd like to get in touch with us, drop us an email at itchoosesyoupodcast@gmail.com.